Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we've got 3 stories that all look very different on the surface. One is about neighbors, kids, and a driveway that somehow turned into a demolition site. One takes place at work where stress became entertainment for the wrong people. And one starts with a simple garden dispute that spirals completely out of control. By the end, we're going to compare what actually worked, and you'll get a vote which story handled it best. My smelly coworker kept stealing sales. I found his hidden box of business cards and never told him. I once worked a commissioned retail sales job, the kind where every interaction mattered because your paycheck depended on it. You didn't just sell things, you guarded your customers like a dragon hoarding gold. That environment already brings out some questionable behavior in people, but this one coworker took it to a level I still haven't seen matched. From day one, this guy was a problem. He would literally step between me and my customer mid-conversation like he was inserting himself into a queue that didn't exist. If I was walking a customer to the register, he'd suddenly appear at my elbow and try to slide his hands onto the keyboard while I was ringing them out. More than once, I had to physically block him with my body and say, "I've got this one," while the customer looked between us like they'd wandered into a low-budget nature documentary about territorial animals. On top of that, he smelled absolutely horrific. I don't mean long shift bad or forgot deodorant once bad, I mean it followed him. Customers would visibly recoil when he leaned in to talk. And honestly, the smell matched the rest of him, because he was terrible at the job. He didn't know the products, couldn't explain plans properly, and regularly gave wrong information that the rest of us had to clean up. Stealing sales wasn't a shortcut for him, it was his entire survival strategy. Eventually, I got fed up and switched companies. Same industry, different employer, fresh start. Or so I thought. On my second week there, I walked into the break room and saw him sitting at the table. Same guy, same smell, same expression. I actually stopped short and said out loud, "You have got to be kidding me." Apparently, the universe had decided I hadn't suffered enough yet. His behavior didn't change. If anything, he got bolder. But this time, it wasn't just me dealing with it. He managed to annoy every single person on the team within a month. Management started cracking down on him because complaints were coming from all directions, not just one rep. That cut down his ability to openly shove people aside, but it didn't stop him from trying to find loopholes. At the time, we worked in cellular sales, back before cloud backups were common. If a customer wanted to transfer anything beyond contacts, they needed an SD card, a computer, or iTunes. We had a transfer machine that technically did photos too, but it was temperamental at best and would randomly miss half the data. Because of that, a lot of customers trading in phones had to leave and come back later to finish the sale. Roughly half of them, honestly. Those return customers were prime targets for sales theft. If you weren't there when they came back, someone else could grab them. To stop fights, management made a rule. Return sales went to whichever rep's business card the customer had. Cards were stapled to the quote sheet we gave them, so it was supposed to be simple. If you forgot to give a card, that sale was fair game. When I started, I immediately asked management to order business cards for me. I wasn't about to lose commission over something that stupid. My cards arrived quickly. Neat little boxes with my name and sales code printed clearly. Stinky coworker, on the other hand, never bothered to order his own. Instead, he'd take customers' quote sheets, cross out the original rep's name, and write his own over it. The problem for him was that the cards were glossy. Pen ink didn't stick well, and by the time the customer came back, the scribbled over name was usually half rubbed off. You'd look at it, squint, and think, can't read that. Guess I'll use the original rep sales code. This wasn't just me, everyone did it. Plausible deniability was the name of the game. No one said anything out loud, but there was a silent agreement that if he couldn't be bothered to get his own cards, he didn't get the sales. Especially since everyone knew he was crossing names out on purpose. About a month into this, I ducked into the back room to grab more of my cards. As I climbed up the little stepladder to reach the shelf, I heard his voice from behind me, "Hey, can you grab me some of yours too?" I sighed internally but said, "Sure thing." I reached up, pulled down my box, and right next to it was another box. His box, full of his business cards, clearly labeled, delivered months ago. I paused for just a second, then did exactly what I said I would do. I grabbed my box of cards, then I moved his box farther back on the shelf, turned it so the label wasn't visible, and tucked it behind some outdated signage where no one ever looked. I climbed down, handed him a few of my cards, and went about my day. This is the masterstroke. You didn't steal, sabotage, or confront, you just didn't help. And by hiding his own cards and letting him use yours, you trapped him in a cycle of his own making. He was so busy scheming to steal sales that he never even checked for the tool that would have solved his problem. His laziness and dishonesty became his own cage. From that point on, nothing changed for him. Return customers kept coming back with quote sheets showing my name or someone else's, and he kept losing sales. He got angrier, snappier, more desperate. He complained loudly about people stealing from him, completely missing the irony. Finally, months later, he snapped. He marched into the manager's office and demanded to know why he didn't have business cards yet. I wasn't in the room, but I heard the manager's voice carry out into the sales floor. "Your cards came in months ago. They should be on the shelf in the back." The silence afterward was incredible. A few minutes later, I watched him walk into the back room, shoulders squared, confidence high. Then I watched him come back out slowly, face red, jaw clenched, eyes darting around like he was trying to figure out who had wronged him. He never said a word, just went back to his station and stared at the counter. He still smelled terrible, he still sucked at the job, but he never crossed my name off a card again. And every time I grabbed a fresh stack of my own cards from the shelf, I couldn't help smiling, knowing his box had been there the whole time, waiting, while he burned himself trying to steal what he couldn't earn. It's pretty wild how someone could be so obvious about taking what isn't theirs and then act surprised when others finally catch on, especially in an environment where everyone's already fed up with their behavior. And our second story. When my daughter tried to take my inheritance by force, I sold it all and bought freedom instead. I am 57 years old, and last year I lost my husband of 25 years. Writing that still feels unreal. We built a life together from nothing, survived the usual storms, raised 2 children, and always assumed we'd grow old side by side. Instead, I buried him. Our son had already passed away not long after our daughter got married, so by the time my husband died, I felt like the walls of my life had collapsed inward all at once. Grief didn't come in waves. It came like a constant pressure on my chest that never let up. Before her marriage, my daughter and I were close. She was affectionate, thoughtful, and present. We talked regularly, spent holidays together, and I never once worried about where I stood in her life. She married the man she chose, and I supported her completely. I paid for what I could, smiled through the nerves, and told myself this was just the next chapter. Almost immediately after the wedding, everything changed. She stopped visiting. Texts went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. Weeks turned into months, and I was left wondering how I'd gone from mom to an inconvenience she couldn't be bothered to acknowledge. When my husband died, I expected at the very least a phone call, some sign that my child cared that her father was gone. She didn't come to the funeral. She didn't attend any memorial events. She didn't even ask how I was holding up. I told myself she was grieving in her own way, that maybe distance was how she coped. That illusion shattered 6 months later when she showed up at my house unannounced with her husband and a lawyer in tow. No warning, no concern, just a knock at the door and entitlement standing on my porch. They sat at my dining table like they owned it. The lawyer slid a stack of documents toward me and told me I needed to sign them along with a blank sheet of paper. A blank sheet. I asked my daughter what this was about. She wouldn't answer. I asked the lawyer directly, and he explained far too casually that they were transferring all of my late husband's assets into my daughter and son-in-law's names. I told them no, calmly at first, then more firmly. That's when my daughter snapped, lunged at me, and tried to physically force my thumb onto the paperwork. I screamed. I don't remember deciding to do it. It just came out. Neighbors rushed over, drawn by the noise. My daughter was still trying to grab my hand, hissing at me to just sign it already. I told her to get out of my house before I called the police. She refused. One of my neighbors physically intervened and shoved them out the door, while another stood between me and my daughter, watching her be dragged away, kicking and yelling. Something inside me went cold. That wasn't my child anymore. That was someone who saw me as an obstacle. After that day, the messages started. Sweet messages, polite messages, thank you notes for assets I hadn't transferred, gratitude for being named beneficiary, and things I had never signed over. It was like she was living in an alternate reality where bullying and violence magically resulted in inheritance. I was nauseated reading them. Each message felt like another attempt to rewrite what had happened, to gaslight me into believing I had already agreed to something I never would have given freely under those circumstances. A week later, I went to see my own lawyer. He listened quietly, reviewed the situation, and then told me something that changed everything. Because my husband died without a will and because all assets were marital, everything belonged to me, fully, legally, entirely. I could do whatever I wanted with it. That was the moment I stopped feeling afraid and started feeling decisive. If my daughter wanted to treat me like a disposable ATM, then I would remove the machine altogether. Wow. The lawyer's words didn't just give you legal standing, they gave you back your agency. In that moment, you stopped being a grieving widow under attack and became the sole owner of your future. The realization that everything was already yours to decide flipped the entire dynamic on its head. I sold everything, the house, the land, the investments, all of it. It took time, paperwork, and patience, but when it was gone, I walked away with 8 figures and no ties left behind. I bought a new home in a place I'd always dreamed of living, somewhere peaceful and far from anyone who knew my past. I furnished it exactly how I wanted. I started traveling. I slept without anxiety for the first time in years. I finally began living for myself instead of surviving for others. Word eventually reached me that my daughter tried to sue after realizing what I'd done. The case went nowhere. There was nothing left for her to claim, and everything had been legally mine to sell. Now she wants to meet me. She's sending people to track me down, asking relatives and old acquaintances to pass along messages about reconciliation and forgiveness. I've said no every time. I don't owe her closure. I don't owe her explanations. She made her choice when she brought a lawyer and a blank page into my home. They still don't know where I live, and I intend to keep it that way. I have no social media, no shared contacts, no interest in reopening a door that was kicked in with greed and violence. Whatever she imagined she was entitled to burned the moment she decided to take instead of ask. I didn't cut her out of my life. She walked out on her own, and I simply locked the door behind her and took my peace with me. I keep thinking about how fast she went from ignoring you to showing up with a lawyer. That tells you everything. No concern, no checking in, just business. And not even honest business. Trying to pressure you with a blank page is wild. Selling everything wasn't cruel. It was you taking back control. Now that there's nothing left to grab, suddenly she wants a meeting? Funny how that works. You don't owe her closure, forgiveness, or a second chance to hurt you again. And our last story. My controlling boss refused to pay me. One call to the state wiped out his business. Several years back, I went to work for a towing company because, frankly, it was one of the few things I knew how to do that didn't actively destroy my body. I'd spent years painting cars, and that line of work was already catching up with my lungs and joints. Towing wasn't glamorous, but the pay looked decent on paper, and I figured if I kept my head down and did the work, it'd be fine. That optimism lasted about 3 months. From day one, the setup was strange. We didn't have assigned trucks. We had to share them, rotating based on whatever system the boss decided made sense that week. Even stranger, he insisted on telling us exactly where to sit while waiting for calls. Specific parking lots, specific street corners. God help you if you drifted too far from wherever he thought the good calls would come from. He claimed it was all about maximizing earnings, but it didn't take long to realize it was really about control. The boss himself was a piece of work. Every truck had a transponder installed so he could monitor us in real time. If the wheels weren't moving, he knew. If you idled too long with the air conditioning on during a heat wave, your phone would ring. If you sat with the heat running in winter, same deal. He'd bark into the phone demanding to know why you weren't moving, why fuel was being wasted, why you weren't magically generating work out of thin air. It didn't matter that we were waiting for dispatch. In his mind, sitting still meant slacking off. A few months in, I started noticing something else. Despite running nonstop, my checks weren't lining up with the effort I was putting in. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't dodging calls. I was doing exactly what he told me to do, sitting exactly where he told me to sit, sometimes for hours at a stretch. One night, while parked in some dimly lit lot waiting for a call that never came, I started digging into labor laws on my phone out of sheer boredom and frustration. That's when I stumbled onto a concept that changed everything. Engaged to wait versus waiting to be engaged. It turns out the distinction matters a lot. If an employer allows you to roam freely, go home, run errands, or otherwise live your life while waiting for work, you're not entitled to hourly pay. You're waiting to be engaged. But if your employer requires you to be in a specific place, ready to work at a moment's notice, and controls where you sit and what you do, you're engaged to wait. And engaged to wait means hourly wages, not just commission. I didn't say a word to him about it, not yet. Instead, I started documenting everything. Where I was told to sit, how long I stayed there, when I was reprimanded for moving. When he called to complain about idling, I kept notes quietly, methodically, knowing full well this wasn't going to end with a friendly conversation. About a month later, the tone shifted. He started coming down on me hard over the pettiest nonsense imaginable. One day, he found an empty soda can in the cup holder of a truck and absolutely lost his mind. Full-on screaming fit, red-faced, spittle-flying rage over trash that could have been thrown out in 10 seconds. That was the moment I mentally checked out. I already had another job lined up. All that was left was execution. I called him and told him we needed to talk about my final paycheck. We set a time, and when I walked into his office, I laid everything out calmly. I explained the law. I explained how his own rules placed us squarely in engaged to wait territory. I told him I expected to be paid for the hours I was required to sit where he told me unable to leave or use my time freely. He didn't even pretend to consider it. He laughed and told me flat out that I wasn't getting paid for that time and that it was understood when I took the job. I nodded, didn't argue, took my final check, and walked out. There was no point debating him. He'd already made his choice. The following Monday, I made one phone call to the State Labor Board. I explained the situation, walked them through the policies, and told them exactly how he controlled our movements. The person on the other end went very quiet, then asked me to repeat a few details. By the end of the call, I could tell they were extremely interested. That single call was the detonator. You didn't need to fight him yourself. You just handed the facts to the one entity with the power to hold him accountable. His own system was his downfall. They launched an investigation. They pulled his employment records. They interviewed current drivers. They reviewed schedules, GPS data, and pay structures. Everything I'd experienced turned out to be standard operating procedure for his entire operation. When the bill finally came due, it wasn't just about me. It was about every driver he'd been squeezing for years. He couldn't afford it, not even close. He sold the trucks, then the lot, then the boat he loved bragging about. The business folded completely. I didn't get everything I was owed, just a fraction really, but watching someone who built their little empire on intimidation and ignorance collapse under the weight of their own arrogance was worth more than any check. Knowing the law just a little better than he did was enough, and watching it all burn down from a safe distance was pure satisfaction. When you put these three stories side by side, the contrast is stark. The first shows boundaries enforced externally. The behavior stops, even if resentment follows. The second shows power shifting quietly when emotional leverage is removed. And the third shows how escalation plus entitlement leads to consequences no one can undo. Same core issue, ignored boundaries, three different responses, three very different endings. The real question isn't which story is the most dramatic, it's which response actually worked. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a new video every single day. Thank you all for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.